afternoon and welcome to the September 19th Strategic Planning Committee meeting. I am going to start off with introductions. I'm Carla Silvestre, Chair of the committee.
Good afternoon, Lynn Harris.
Good afternoon, Lori Christina Webb, Chief of Staff for the Board.
Lana Haddad, Administrative Services Manager for the Board.
Good afternoon, Jason McCoy, Coordinator, Administrative and Supervisory Staffing.
Good afternoon, Donna Redmond-Jones, one of the Directors in School Support and Wellbeing.
Good afternoon, Gary Bartee, one of the Directors of the Leadership Development Unit.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yolanda Stanislaus. I serve as the Director for the Department of Professional Growth Systems.
Stephanie Sharon, Chief of Strategic Initiatives.
Good afternoon, Keisha Addison, Director in the Office of Shared Accountability.
Good afternoon, Pat Murphy, Deputy Superintendent.
Dr. Joftis is not able to join us today, and Mr. Kim should be here any minute now. But in the meantime, we do have an informational summary. If there's any feedback from that, nope. Okay. And could you acknowledge the agenda for us, Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Looks good. Okay. So today is our first Strategic Planning Committee meeting for the year. And we are talking about a most important topic, which is the people that are in front of our children, our students, the teachers and principals. And we know that leadership matters, and so it's important that we get a good understanding of what's happening in our schools in terms of who is in our schools, in which schools, how they're being supported, how they're growing, so that they can be the best leaders that our children deserve. So for today, everyone has the PowerPoint on board docs, but I just wanted to frame it just what we can expect today. So we're going to hear about the data story of experienced and diverse principals in high-need schools from the baseline 2017 ERS data to 2022 today. Years of experience, race, ethnicity, high-need schools, Title I in focus. Show the link between experience in high-need schools and student performance. Does the link show a correlation based on academic achievement data or not? Share the strategic support plan for principals in high-need schools. What does principal supervision look like for these principals versus other principals? Is the support differentiated? Discuss the role of the principal supervisor in the distribution of resources. Hear about the central office transformation work. Explain how MCPS defines a highly effective principal and how does our definition align with the research. And finally, incentivizing highly effective principals moving to high-need schools. So looking forward to a wonderful and robust conversation. So with that, I will pass it on to Ms. Sharon.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're all very excited to be part of this presentation today. As you know, this is our first meeting, as Ms. Silvestre said, for our Strategic Planning Committee. Last year, we had an intense focus for our committee meetings around academic excellence. We're really excited to kick off this year with the third pillar that you see on the screen around professional and operational excellence. If we could go to the next slide, please. So again, just to frame out and to continue what Ms. Silvestre started around what today's focus is going to be, we are focusing in the pillar of the strategic plan on professional and operational excellence today, and specifically the objective that states increase experienced and diverse principals and teachers serving in high-need schools. And as Ms. Silvestre indicated, the focus for today's meeting is really going to be honing in on the principal part of that objective, although that objective does identify the experienced and diverse principals and teachers serving in high-need schools. For the purpose of our discussion today, we're going to do a deep dive on that principal component. Next slide, please. So in order to help us frame the conversation, I want to take us back to the Equitable Access to Resource study that was conducted by Education Resource Strategies in 2019. And the reason I want to take a step back before we go forward in this conversation is because the outcomes of this study really helped to shape and frame this objective in the board's strategic plan. So to bring us back, in 2019, ERS partnered with MCPS to conduct a study that explored how well MCPS advocated and used its resources to promote equity and excellence for all students. So through this examination, they took a look at the 11 dimensions of equity, and they ended up providing detailed summaries and reports on the areas that you see listed here of performance, school funding, teacher quality, instructional time and attention, rigorous empowering curriculum, diverse and inclusive schools and classrooms, a whole child approach, and school leadership quality. While we're not today going to go through the entirety of the ERS study, we are going to be talking about that one component that really breaks apart principals in high-need schools. So if we can go to the next slide. So to continue, as we think about the objective in the strategic plan and where that objective or how that objective became a priority, findings that were reported by ERS was that for MCPS focus group students, and when I talk about our focus group students, I'm referring to our African American and Hispanic Latino students, both farms and non-farms. It was identified that they were more likely than their white and Asian peers to spend time with novice teachers. So that was one of the first big findings from the ERS study. And I think it's important to note that for the purpose of this study, novice for this study was examined in two ways. One, teachers that were brand new to MCPS, meaning that teachers who had fewer than 3 years of experience in MCPS, not necessarily outside of MCPS. They were new to MCPS. The other identifying factor for novice was that the teachers that were identified that were brand new to teaching. So teachers who had fewer than 3 years of teaching overall. So that was one of the big findings that we found from the ERS study. Next slide, please. When we take a look at that leadership lens, what we found in the ERS study is that higher needs elementary and middle schools were more likely to have novice principals than lower need elementary schools. And you can see on the right the percentage breakdown that is stated there. However, this trend was reversed in high school, where we saw a higher percentage of novice principals in non-focus schools. So again, even for when we talk about principals, novice for this study was defined as less than 3 years of experience. Next slide, please. So again, for the purpose of framing our strategic planning committee today, I wanted to make sure that everyone had a common understanding of what ERS defined as a high-need school. So when you take a look here for the ERS study, high-need schools were defined and identified based on the overall farms rate, and you can see that breakdown on the chart. Having said that, MCPS is still taking a look at what really defines a high-need schools, and we are currently in the process of thinking about multiple measures that also define high-need schools outside of just farms rate, because we know that needs can be defined in a variety of ways. Next slide, please. So, as we know and as we've explored in our strategic plan, we know that the real key to student success is having a highly qualified, diverse, and culturally responsive staff of both teachers and leaders. So today you're going to be hearing in more detail, in addition to seeing data of what that looks like and what we look like as a system since the 2019 ERS study, you're also going to have an opportunity to really be able to dive in deeper today in this four-prong approach to ensure that we are actually making sure that we are having a highly qualified, diverse, culturally responsive staff in all of our schools and offices. And that is going to be broken down into recruitment, development, support, and supervision. So that is how we're going to be framing our presentation today. So at this time, I would now like to turn it over to Mr. Gary Barty, the Director of the Leadership Development Unit, who's going to be starting to talk about those first two prongs that we just noted on the chart above on recruitment and the development of principals within Montgomery County Public Schools. Mr. Barty.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So the infographic that you're looking at is basically the MCPS principal pipeline that our leadership development program works on. And so what we do is we work with teacher leaders all the way to administrators who are eligible to apply for principal vacancies. And so just starting from the beginning, the Future Administrative Workshop is an opportunity to provide support to teacher leaders, those who are interested in leadership. We provide that 3 times a year. So we have 3 application windows for someone to get into the AP pool and 1 application window to get in the assistant school administrator pool. During those application windows, prior to the application, we offer in-person and virtual workshops to support them in terms of the process, clarity on the process, as well as how to make themselves a viable candidate, how they've demonstrated impact in their current work. That's what we really coach them around. The reason we offer in-person and virtual is that we don't only support those within MCPS, but we also support people interested in coming to our school system. So we have candidates, sometimes even in other countries or coming back to the States or in other states who are on the virtual platform and really getting the clear understanding of what it takes to become a candidate in MCPS. Many of them, although we define novice as new to our system, many of them are experienced assistant. We have a number of experienced assistant principals coming in the first year in our program, as well as former experienced principals who are coming as a first year in our program. So the level of experience is not exclusive to what we see in terms of when they arrive here. It's actually experiences that they've had before. A perfect example of that, and I'll continue with the graphic, is that just our last cohort of AP1, AP2s who just finished, we had 2 experienced principals from Baltimore City who decided to enter our school after more than 3 years as an experienced principal, entered our school system as AP1s. One became a principal, was applied to be a principal intern in their second year, eventually was pulled to be an acting principal and was appointed this year as a principal. Another one who came was just appointed acting principal. So within 2 years, they're both principals in our system, but they started in our first year in our AP1 program. So novice doesn't always project the image that people would think it is in terms of just new to administration. There's a variety of levels of experience. So Future Administrative Workshop, teacher leaders, team leaders are given the opportunity to prepare to move into the administrative pool. Even when they're in the AP pool, we then provide a support session to securing a AP position. So anybody who makes the AP pool, we then do a session to help them become APs within our school system. Once they become an assistant principal hired by a school, we have a program called the AP1 program. The AP1 program is not entry level, but it's a foundation. It gives experienced external candidates an opportunity to get acclimated to our school system, understand our culture, develop relationships, and develop cohort relationships with the group that they're developing with over that period of time. We also do monthly seminars with them, and so each month we do some just seminars that are based on just ABAR leadership, to transformational leadership, really addressing adaptive challenges and building their capacity by being highly effective. We use the same A&S standards that are based on the professional standards for educational leaders as the foundation by which we evaluate them twice a year, mid-year and end of year, for those in the AP1 program. There also is an entry called ASA. An assistant school administrator does not need their Admin 1 certification from Maryland State Department of Education. They could actually have 4 years to work in an administrative position prior to attaining that, but it is a 4-year timeout. So either they become an AP or they return to a teacher level position if they do not get their Admin 1 and secure an AP position. This gives an entry point, and only distinction is they're not doing evaluations, teacher evaluations. So they do the observations, similar work, and they work 11 months as opposed to 12 months. And so that's an ASA opportunity to get people who are in the administrative program opportunities to be in administration before they go into that. So you go from ASA to AP, or you can come straight in as an assistant principal. AP2, which I said before, An experienced person can go from AP1 to principal intern, AP1 to apply to the pre-qualified principal list. There's different paths for them, or they could have a modified AP2 year. So instead of having 4 meetings, they would only have 2. A perfect example of that, everyone in our program, AP1 and AP2, have 4 professional development team meetings. So on the professional development team, we have the principal, who's the principal developer. We have an AP coach, an experienced AP who coaches them through their work and helps them unpack their work and talk about their impact as a leader. And we also have one of the directors from the Office of School Support and Wellbeing. And this year, for the first time, we actually have an associate, if it's the principal supervisor, on that team as well. Their second year, they also get a central service mentor to help them align with the work of the district in terms of understanding the implications of their work during their second year. And so it's about having a measurable impact in their work, not just doing the work or saying, I sat in this role, but how do they know that they made a measurable impact in terms of student achievement? What was the baseline data, how were they monitoring their progress, and what was the end result as a result of their leadership and their collaboration within their school community. So after AP1, AP2, candidates are eligible for pre-qualified principal or for principal internship. We get them at different levels. Sometimes they do first year AP1, AP2, and principal intern. Sometimes they do 5 years as an assistant principal prior to applying, maybe 9. So they come in at different points when they feel like they're ready for that step. We have the process streamlined so they could apply to, and I'll give you some clarity because I'm going to show you some data and I'll explain why that data shifted over the year. But prior to each of those application periods for principal intern and pre-qualified principal, which is one application process, prior to that we do a future principal workshop to support candidates, both external and internal, in matriculating onto the pre-qualified principal or principal intern program. Only internal candidates can apply to the internship because we would like to have a knowledge of their work on a personal level, not just paper resume, to be a part of the internship, since we're asking somebody to develop them and bring them into a school and voluntarily develop them as a principal developer of an intern. Following the pre-qualified principal list, they are principal eligible once they're on that list. Following a year as a principal intern, a successful year, when they have an effective or highly effective evaluation, they are now also on the pre-qualified principal list. That determination is made at the mid-year evaluation. So the mid-year evaluation around December. Once they receive an effective evaluation, that means they're guaranteed an effective final end-of-year evaluation, because the only way you get an end-of-year ineffective evaluation is if you have an ineffective mid-year. Then is provided, in addition to ineffective mid-year, you have to have an observation in that first semester, an improvement plan, so you could address the areas of concern so that you're in a trajectory to improve your practice and become effective at the end of the year. So if they're able to get to the mid-year point effectively, then we know that they will be on the pre-qualified principal list. That's important because the hiring season opens up, especially for schools that are new, like Clarksburg, I believe number 8, which will be opening up, will probably be posted in January. And so they would need to be eligible for that to be able to participate January and February, sometime in that time of year. For instance, last year, our interns, one of our interns who just opened, Harriet Tubman, she experienced highly effective, one of our highly effective interns, competed against experienced and novice administrators and was successful in securing Harriet Tubman. And just from visiting her and what I've heard as you visited her in the beginning of the year, doing an exceptional job starting off that year. And so that's where we are in terms of the principal pipeline. And then once they are principals, that's when and she'll present later, turn it over to the Department of Professional Growth Systems and their work and continue to support with them. But we prepare them from teacher leader up until principal intern and pre-qualified principal list and support them in that respect. Next slide. So this data that you see before you are the size of our cohorts for each year. And so blue represents the number of ASAs. So for instance, 2019, there were 11 ASAs. And orange, elementary AP1s, gray, and so on and so forth, and our principal interns. If you notice, the 2019-2020 year, we had 14 principal interns, followed by 10 principal interns, but then you see a big jump in the 21 and 22 year in terms of 22 and 22. Actually, those numbers are even higher. We've actually had about 25 principal interns, but 3 of them were appointed as principals before they completed the principal internship program because they were eligible for the pre-qualified principal list as an intern as well. And so the difference in the jump, and one of the things we equate that to, is that our hiring process when we first started the pre-qualified principal list, we used to have them apply for the pre-qualified principal list, and we separately had them apply for the internship. And it was a similar process, but yet we had them jump through so-called 2 application windows. We then presented that challenge to our senior leadership team. They agreed we could have a singular process. Once we made a singular process, we also improved our communication with bulletins, with our website, communicating in memorandums, making sure everyone was clear and understanding. We even went to the professional learning communities that MCAP has for assistant principals, elementary, middle, and high school, met with each of the cohort groups and let them understand what that process was, how we were supporting them, and then did informational sessions for them in addition to the future principal process that was held for them. And so all of that outreach and the connection and hearing from those cohort groups, the clarity of understanding it increased interest, and it resulted in recruiting more people and having more applicants in terms of applying for the principalship vacancy. This year, we have 15 interns. Actually, we have 13. There were 2 that were pulled already, and that's why it's down to 13. But the number, post-pandemic, people were in a place where they wanted to pause a little before entering the principalships. But in spite of that lower number for our principal interns in this current school year, we do have at least 7 interns from last year that are on the pre-qualified principal list eligible for principalships waiting, and additional ones from previous years. And so we still have a pool of candidates in our pre-qualified principal list available for principal vacancies. The next slide, please. On this slide, it gives you race demographics. And so as you can look early on, the majority of our candidates were white in terms of the red line. Blue is African American, black, Hispanic, Latino is gray, and Asian is yellow. And so early on, prior to the clarity of process, that's when we started increasing with diversity. And so our diversity started increasing 2019, and then 2021, 2022 is when we were recruiting that, and we anticipate also another jump in the diversity of candidates for the upcoming school year in terms of just the interest that we're hearing from both some Hispanic administrators as well as some African American administrators in terms of applying for next year's internship program. So I didn't know, so that's, just want to let you know that the diversity, we're working on the diversity and definitely outreaching and meeting with groups and helping support that process. And so in 21, there were 9 African American and 1 Hispanic, and then in 2022, there were 3 Hispanic, 3 Asian, and 7 white and 7 African American interns in our program. And so this year, it's 5, 6, and 2 Asian. Next slide, please. And this is a slide that tells you the 2019-2022 principal interns in terms of total interns, principals, the Title I principals. Now, the availability of Title I schools is, of course, based on vacancies. And so the number of vacancies at the time of Title I schools were very few during that time. And so, but as you could see, there were just 1 to 2 over the years. Acting principals, we had 1 in 2021. And some we've actually had as supervisors. Some people left the system, as you can see, and that's the number of people that remain on our pre-qualified principal list. So the number is 13 that are still eligible to be principals that have not been appointed at this time. And next slide. So just to share our continuous improvement, one of the things we do in terms of our leadership development program is we debrief with all of our stakeholders. We work closely with the Office of School Support and Wellbeing in terms of, and so we partner with them at the end of the year. For instance, we wanted to enhance our principal internship program. So we met with our principal developers from last year, our principal interns who participated in the program, our directors, associates, some executive staff members, and we collaborated on just their insight and feedback in terms of how can we make this a richer experience, build their capacity, help them develop more help them develop as transformational leaders, and really enter the work as highly effective principals. And some of those transitions, for instance, one of the ideas that came out, as a principal transitions to a new school, they're responsible for a 90-day entry plan. And so that's one of the things we have interns transition in with. And so we looked at some parallels in terms of what would mirror entering a new school as a principal, and how do we use those things within our program to make sure they hit the ground running, and it's not the first time experience for them, but they've actually gone through that process even with their practicum of taking over a school, being in charge of the school, and the principal leaving and another visiting principal coming there to support them while they run their school. And so it's a robust way of just collaborating with stakeholders to build the richness of the program, and working with all our partners in terms of how we assign mentors for instance, one of the, just to add the bullet number 3, we assign mentors for ASAs and acting APs. So when, as you know, when the hiring season and we start the year, sometimes we still have vacancies and we have to put acting assistant principals in schools. We ask the acting assistant principals to participate in our assistant school administrator cohort, which is a monthly meeting that we have, so that as a new administrator in an acting role, they get monthly support in terms of how to, they have a cohort group, but they also get monthly support in terms of developing their capacity as school-based leaders, and they're not just asked to step into a role without support. We also give them mentors to experienced assistant principals, former ASAs, to support them in their work so that they're not navigating that new world all by themselves. So everything we do is about providing support, giving them coaches. I did forget to mention that the interns get a coach, and the intern's coach is actually a former principal. So myself, Dr. Yolanda Stanislaw, Ms. Connie Yang, we actually, and other directors who are supervisors and directors in there who are former principals, elementary, middle, and high, are actually a principal intern's coach. So during that year, not only are they getting support from their team, but the coach assigned to them is a former principal, helping them reflect and build their capacity as interns and future principals in our school district. So there's a lot of support in terms of the recruiting and retaining diverse administrators, building positive relations, mentoring, and coaching that's provided. At this time, I'm going to transition to Mr. Jason, excuse me, Mr. Jason McCoy. And he goes, Mr. James McCoy, but he goes by Jason, the coordinator of from the Office of Human Capital Management and A&S Staffing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Barty. Good afternoon, everyone. Jason McCoy, A&S Staffing Coordinator. Next slide, please. So this data represents the last 2 years. We had a total of 58 principals hired over the past 2 years, and if we look at FY22, we had a total of 21 principals, and this breaks it down by level. You can see the blue represents elementary, and the orange middle school, and the gray high school. So we had 8 high schools, 5 middle schools, and 8 elementary schools for FY22. This past season, we had 37 total. As you saw, many of them come obviously before the board for appointment. We had a total of 26 elementary, 7 middle, and 2 high school and 2 specialized schools. So again, this gives you the overall picture for the past 2 years with the 58 principals. Next slide, please. This is a breakdown just in terms of the principal hires, in terms of race and ethnicity. As you see, we have Asian, African American, Hispanic, Latino, 2 or more races, and white. It shows compared the blue year is this past hiring season, FY23, and the green is FY22. So we had an increase of 6 principals that were hired that are Asian. We went from 8 to 11 for African American, Black African American, and 1 to 3 for Hispanic, Latino, and then 1 increase for 2 or more races, and for our white hires, our principals from 12 to 16. So we do see an increase of 14% in terms of our diversity as we compare FY22 to FY23. Our diversity was 43% of diverse candidates that were hired, and this past hiring season we're at 57%. Next slide, please. Certainly looking at our most impacted schools, so this graph represents, and as Mr. Barty said, certainly it depends on the vacancies in terms of if they're Title I schools or schools that have a higher farms rate. So in FY22, we had the total of 21 schools. 9 of those schools had farms rates that were higher than 45%. And this past season, we had 18 schools that had a farms rate of higher, 45%, higher than 45% farms rate. And so the data shows the number of principals hired and were placed at those particular schools. Next slide, please. And again, we have the operational definition of novice principal, the 3 years or less. So number of principals hired in terms of the experience, we had 18 considered to be novice principals in FY22, and FY23 we had 27. So 10 coming in with experience of more than 3 years. In the previous year, it was 3 with more than 3 years. But it was just what was just illustrated. Many of our principals did go through, although they may be first-year principals, they did go through the robust leadership development program. For this past year, we had 25 out of our 27 first-year principals either served as acting and participated in an internship program. So although they may come in as first-year principals, they have had very rich experiences actually leading the school as an acting or leading the school during that takeover period. So, I think, again, just want to add that narrative as we, keep in mind that definition. And the same held true for the previous year, FY22. We had 18 that were considered novice principal, but 16 of those 18 served in either an acting role and or participated in an internship program. So, I think that really speaks a lot about our the opportunity that our administrators have. And coming from a previous district as an administrator, we did not have that robust program. So again, I think that's very important as we, keep in mind the definition of experience. So I would like to open it up for discussion at this time. So I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Silvestri.
Thank you. I think the first question that comes to mind is, so we started out with the ERS data from 2017. So has that changed at all? Do we still have overrepresentation of novice principals in impacted elementary schools? I'm seeing it in here, but it's not clear to me. Do we know?
So we don't have that exact data for this particular presentation as far as the novice, but we can definitely recalculate it to show based on the years of experience from that original data and bring it back to the group.
Okay. And there's, I agree that there's a lot of, the pathway is very robust, and our novice principals are ready to hit the ground running. But I think ERS was not, they were talking largely about experience. So do we have any data on, so you've described the pathway to become a very ready-to-go principal, but do we have any data on experienced principals changing schools or going to an impacted school, or will you cover that later on?
So I think that it's a complex answer. Are you asking, I'm just trying to get clarity on what exactly the question is that you're asking. So are you asking to see if the years of experience translate to the efficacy through student outcomes? Was that the question you were asking?
No, but that's a good one, too. I guess, okay, let me start over. So is this, what you've described here, so they're going to hit the ground running, they're going to be excellent novice principals, and is the expectation that they're going to stay at their schools for X number of years so that that school can benefit from the investment in the preparation and their gained knowledge as they do get more experience? Will they become experienced on the job, but not then go to another school or leave where we have placed them?
So I can speak to that. One of the things that, at least and this is more qualitative than quantitative data, but in terms of with the interns, they are particular about the schools they apply for. They have a strong interest in working with impacted schools, but they also are interested in becoming principals, and so they apply for vacancies that they believe they could do that strong work. They only apply for communities where they want to make an investment in that community. They recognize that just coming in 1 or 2 years is not necessarily going to make the type of impact that they'd like to have, and so they're entering schools expecting, other than family situations occurring that takes them completely out of the system for any extreme reasons that may be an anomaly, they're expecting to stay in the school system and stay in their particular schools and build a history within that school and build that school. So I know that's the interest, and that's been the history of, informally, I don't have the data in front of me, but our most recent interns over the last 5-6 years are still within the same school communities, and they are still where they went, and they did not change schools.
And just to add on to that, we had, out of our 18 schools that were 45% farms rate or higher, we had 10 experienced principals that in this hiring season. 4 of them are at high impact schools. And so they were very conscientious of, this is the school I desire to seek out. And to piggyback on what Mr. Barty just shared, a lot of those interns were very selective and only applied for one school. Out of 37, they were very methodical in terms of the schools in which they wanted to apply and felt that was a match to their skill set and where they desired to be.
So those 4 experienced principals were from MCPS that were switching schools?
We have 2 that have experience in other counties. Okay. One was brand new, and one was one of the individuals that came to us as an experienced principal but started in the AP2 program. And then one came to us from out of MCPS, and then 2 transferred within MCPS.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Harris for hers.
Thank you. First thing, just a couple of clarifying questions. So looking at slide 6 and then comparing it to slide 15. So for the ERS study in 2019, they defined a high-need school as any school that was Focus or Title I, which would mean any school with a farms rate greater than 35%. Is that how I'm interpreting slide 6? And so then, but according to slide 15, we are defining a high-need school with a farms rate above 45%.
It wasn't necessarily a definition, it was just sort of to illustrate kind of a breaking point of, out of the schools, the 37 schools this year and 21 schools last year, just to give you an idea of how many were 45%, that threshold of 45% or higher. It wasn't necessary to define high-need school.
Okay, so for purposes of this, we're defining a high-need school when we're looking at experienced or novice school administrators as a farms rate of 35% or higher?
Well, I think as we discussed earlier, I mean, with this definition, I think is still in sort of, even though that's what the study showed, I mean, we are still in discussion about like what really defines a high-need school.
Because it seems like we would kind of need to know how many schools we are defining as high needs if we can say how many administrators that are novice or more experienced are in those schools. I would just sort of start
I guess
there.
what we can do is we can recalculate it to look at 35% or higher, so so it can be consistent with the ERS
No,
study.
but not, just for the basis of today's conversation, just so that we're all on the same
Yeah.
page, 35% is what we're using when you're showing us data about who's going where, correct?
Because you are telling us these are the high needs schools with principals, but how are you defining high needs schools?
Yeah, I mean, this graph shows 45%, but we can certainly look to see if we missed any. And Dr. Addison, I'm not sure if you want to weigh in.
Yeah, no, I think for this conversation, although ERS used 35, for the context and how we organize the data, and even the data from Gary's team, we looked at that threshold of 45% farms rate or higher. So I would say let's focus on 45%. Okay. We can definitely go back and look at 35, but for this, the data that you see, 45%.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. Okay, thank you. That's clarifying for me. And then, because we know one of the differences, as Ms. Silvestri already noted, 2019. Now, we're kind of a different school system now than we were then. And one of the differences is now we actually have Title I middle schools, and so I'm assuming that we've looked at those Title I middle schools and their leadership. As those schools have made that transition, because that would be also an interesting point of reference, since that is a new designation for us when it comes to our middle schools. Kind of a background question, though. You've identified some certifications that are sort of entry points into this process. The Administrator 1 and Administrator 2 certifications. And so just a few questions. Who teaches those, or who delivers that training and then certifies teachers as completing them successfully? And what is the time commitment? And is there a cost for educators to enter into that sort of threshold preparation?
I can speak to that. The Admin 1 certification is a Maryland State Department of Education certification. You have to take a praxis exam for the Admin 1. It's a $500 exam. The Admin 2 is also a $500 exam. So one makes you eligible to be an assistant principal. The Admin 2 gives you eligibility to be a principal in the state of Maryland.
And so is it just an exam, or is there a course that you take to prepare yourself?
So there's part of coursework you have to have. If you already have a master's, you need to do administration certification, or if you don't have a master's, you have to get a master's in administration to qualify to take the test. And so there's a certain level of leadership experience that's required. So not only are you a teacher for 5 or more years, but you also have to demonstrate 3 or more years of leadership experience, whether you're in a leadership position or you've had a leadership impact within your school community. And so those are the steps that are required, but the Admin 1 certification is issued by the state of Maryland. And so if you demonstrate the teaching experience, you have the correct course studies to submit to our certification department, and you pass the praxis test, which is the $500 test. All of those things get you the Admin 1 certification. You then have other steps to get in the AP pool or the pre-qualified principal pool in terms of other things that you have to qualify for within our district.
So there's not like a preparatory course that if I wanted to achieve Administrator 1 certification, there's not a course I would take. It would just be submitting my teaching experience, my educational preparation.
So
Checking-
if you did not have a master's, you could go to a McDaniels or to a Hood College and take the administration certification master's course. So there is a
You have to
2-year
have
program that you could actually participate. If you already had a master's, you could do the certification course to qualify. So there is coursework associated with it to qualify in addition to taking the.
If you don't have a master's.
If you don't have a master's, there's certification coursework. If you do have a master's, if you don't have a master's, you have to take a master's. If you do, you have to take the master's in administration and
A
supervision.
master's in anything or
No,
a
a
master's?
master's in administration and supervision specifically,
Okay,
yes.
okay. And then just a little bit of, so you've mentioned a lot of supports. You said mentors for all ASAs, and APs, coaches for all APs, experienced principals coaching all interns. And you mentioned that the coaches for the principal interns are people in central office who have been principals, but who are the mentors and the coaches for the ASAs and the acting APs and the other APs?
So for the ASAs, they have former ASAs or experienced assistant principals who we assign to them as coaches. So people who are experiencing the work that they're entering into, we assign them to someone who has this mentoring role in terms of the ASAs. For APs, because they're part of a formal program, they're presenting during 4 meetings. They have an experienced assistant principal coach that helps them prepare for their meetings, demonstrate their work, their impact, and they coach them throughout the year as well. So we have coaches and mentors for everyone who participates in our program.
And how are you, and so the role of consulting principal doesn't come on board until somebody is actually a principal?
That is correct, and
Okay.
that's and that'll be coming up
That's
later
coming up.
in our presentation.
Right,
Yes.
coming attractions. And so the mentors and coaches, that these are people who volunteer?
Yes,
to do
they
this work?
volunteer, and one of the ways we give them continuing professional unit, because it's a budget-neutral effort to get this level of support, so we give them continuing professional units towards recertification. And for coaches, they actually are given a 1 day of professional leave. So through the extended leadership program that is an agreement with the Association and Deputies and Chief Operating Officer, ADC, and MCAP, they actually agreed upon making sure that one of the days of leave, a personal day of leave, is extended to compensate for that level of year support beyond their work for all the AP coaches that support the program.
Okay. And then I think the last question for me at this point, just clarifying again on slide 15, on the number of principal hires, schools, farms rates. I'm guessing we're talking about schools higher and lower than the 45% farms rate. Are all of these what you would consider novice principals, or are some of these principals that might have come in from outside with significant experience?
Well, I mean, out of,
On slide 15.
yeah. So when we look at the 37 schools, we have 27 that were considered novice principals.
Okay.
And then 10 that were considered experienced. And out of that 10, 4 are in either Title I or focus, or schools that are 45% or higher.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and I do apologize for missing the opening of the presentation this afternoon. I did just have one question at this time, thinking back to, I guess I could see what slide it is now. Slide 14, in terms of the number of principal hires by race or ethnicity, I think it was briefly mentioned that there's recently been some outreach efforts in terms of recruitment and some interest. I think it was with the Hispanic Latino community that might increase that diversity moving forward. I was just kind of hoping to hear more about what those efforts have looked like to recruit and onboard potential principals and increase the diversity there.
So one of the The interest, we do a lot of interest meetings, and so between external candidates moving to the school system, the outreach effort is really tapping into and providing support for diverse candidates in terms of getting an even playing field. For instance, when I used to apply in the past, if you don't know our process, if you're not familiar with the culture, you could be at a disadvantage in terms of what we're looking for, even in terms of how your resume is submitted. And so what we've been doing is, as people have expressed interest, we've been making sure there's clarity in terms of the process for internal candidates, those who are in our program. And so not even just with the teacher leaders, but as they become assistant principals, we have explicit conversations about what your interest in principalship within the next couple of years, and really strengthen that advocacy, support them through their professional development process in terms of how do we make sure that they're in a position to make that next step and that they're in a strong place to apply for the internship and pre-qualified principal. And so it's more of a grassroots and a personal relationship that we're developing with people, and we make ourselves available to people in terms of the principals themselves as they see candidates and they see people with leadership experience. They're constantly recruiting and saying, you should go into administration, you should definitely talk to this person. And so we're making connections with both external and internal candidates to try to increase that level of diversity across both African American, Asian, and Hispanic in terms of working with that.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we certainly want to increase our presence, at national conferences that, support our diverse educators. For example, we have, although I'm not able to go to Puerto Rico, but we do have the the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. We will have an MCPS executive staff member who will be in attendance. And so although I'm not personally going to be there as an OHRD representative, I'm coordinating with her to, just to, again, network and, to, bring back, to share information. We have, as Mr. Bartis said, we have virtual sessions that we can connect with folks from around the world. So, that's very intentional. We also have the National Alliance of Black School Educators Conference is right here in the DC area. So we plan on being present there, working closely with our affinity groups, and really having kind of that word of mouth where we have individuals that are part of those affinity groups that are currently administrators, helping us to, bring people to our support sessions or bringing the support sessions, to their monthly meetings. For example, we went to Podier. Gary and I attended one of the functions, and again, that grassroots networking and that word of mouth. Also attended one of the bond sessions where the support sessions that Leadership Development and OHRD partnered to do. We actually brought one to one of their monthly meetings. So again, some of those efforts, but definitely increasing our presence in outreach.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, so the current principal intern cohort has no Hispanic, Latino folks in it? Slide 10?
That is correct.
That's correct. Yeah, I really think that we should kind of bring some people together to really brainstorm what could we be doing differently. Just, I know we've been doing, a lot of this outreach is fantastic, but if we're not getting the results that we want to see, we really have to try some different strategies. Dr. Pollard, the previous president of Montgomery College, used to say a race-based problem requires a race-based solution approach. It's not a race, of course, it's ethnicity. But, and then our anti-racism work in terms of our cultural competence, our cultural sensitivity, one size fits all is not going to work for everyone. And so given that our population, of course, is 33% Hispanic, I think it's time to bring all of our best thinking together to see, what are we not thinking about? Let's ask the community. Let's ask folks that are along the lines of the continuum of leadership at MCPS, so that hopefully by trying some different strategies, we can get some different results.
So one of the challenges our teacher demographics impact our administrative demographics of where we could recruit from. And so with the number of Hispanic and Latino teachers, it impacts how many we could recruit. What I can say is the pandemic did have an influence on interest this year in terms of people just wanting to pause and just let the dust settle, so to speak. But I do know of Hispanic, Latino administrators now who have an interest for next year. So we're anticipating that number going up just based on the interest that's expressed of those who said, what do I need to do? When is the future principal workshop sessions? I'm interested in participating in that. I'm planning on applying. So we are anticipating a difference from this year to next year in terms of that. But it's still impacted by teacher leadership and what we can access and recruit based on the numbers represented at the teacher level. And so that's an area that we definitely need to work on in increasing the representation at the teacher level to increase the number of available at the administrative level as well.
Of course, yes, and that's another topic for another meeting. But if we wait for that to happen, we're not going to see the results that we want to see as soon as we need them. So,
just another question, background, and this could be old, pre-pandemic information, but I thought as a system we were moving away from ASAs. You know, they don't have the level 1 certification, they're not full-time, they're not 12-month. Maybe that has now changed, or?
There was an initiative to phase them out at one point. And then there was also an interest, especially the pandemic and the workload that schools experienced, single administrators. We actually increased them by making sure there was administrative support at our smallest elementary schools. And so we actually increased ASAs in our smallest elementary schools and our largest elementary schools where they needed another administrative support because it's actually more cost effective than an additional AP. And so that's why the ASAs didn't phase out. In addition, in terms of the level of support that's needed at our secondary schools, ASAs were retained. I don't know what the district's plan is at that time, but yes, there was a phase out pre-pandemic, phasing out ASAs and moving toward an AP model. But I know as of recently, that was one of the rationales that shifted as a result of the level of work that was required at schools and making sure single administrators had the support they needed. And ASAs, as a matter of fact, our smaller schools even have teacher positions. 2 of our smaller schools have teacher level positions that provide administrative support instead of having an ASA. So that was just an effort to make sure that those single administrators had support.
And these are the roles you said, it's basically a 4-year gig, and if you don't then move forward with the certification and into another category, then you go back to teaching. So since this was in FY22, this was the biggest part of your cohort, do the demographics of folks that are in the ASA, pool, do they differ from the cohort, the demographics of folks in the other, AP1, AP2, intern, those cohorts?
I don't have that demographic data in front of me, so I don't want to make a guess on what those distinctions are.
Okay, and it would also be interesting to know
I could follow up on that.
How many of them just go back to teaching, and how many of them go forward to achieve.
This year, I believe we had 1 ASA retire and 1 ASA that most do secure an assistant principal position before the 4 years. But we had one that was going to time out, and she was hired as an assistant principal. Okay. So we have a very high, rate of individuals who are ASAs that become assistant principals. I mean, it's a great, training ground, for that.
Okay, thank you.
And I know that there are some administrators that have stopped applying for principal positions, maybe because they got frustrated or before all these supports were in place, maybe it's been years. So that's another pool to maybe go back and just give them some honest feedback. You know, maybe this is why you didn't get it, but now we have a lot more support. Is it worth trying again? So just something to think about. So, and we can continue.
Something aligned to that. We had, for instance, we asked Mr. McCoy for the information of people who did not get accepted to the pre-qualified principal list. And so we're circling back to meet with them, give them the support, and to give them, and I already spoke with all 4 of them that we're speaking about, to provide them with the support to be able to encourage their interest of applying again. And so we do not, we definitely do follow up with people who are not a part of that process, who've had experience before. We had somebody who applied some years ago. Some of our recent interns that actually are principals now, they actually applied to the internship twice or 3 times before they got in. And so with that additional support, they did return. They didn't lose heart, and now they're serving as principals. And so we do provide that level of support and coaching and really talk about how to enter that and what they need to do to be a more favorable candidate in the future.
We're ready to continue. So at this time, I'm very proud to turn it over to my principal intern coach, who was my coach when I was a principal intern, Dr. Yolanda Stanislaus, who's currently the director of the Department of Professional Growth Systems, to discuss how we support principals once they get into that role through our PGS programs.
Well, thank you. I hope I can live up to that intro. And good afternoon, Vice President Silvestri, Ms. Harris, and Mr. Kim. Thank you for having me. So next slide, please. I forgot that part. Okay, so within the Department of Professional Growth Systems, we really look at it as a tree of growth for our department, for our system in general. We have 3 main branches for the Department of Professional Growth Systems, and that would be the support professionals, professional growth systems, the teacher professional growth systems, and the administrative and supervisory professional growth systems. So today, discussing the work that we do to support new principals. Our consulting principals within our department, we support our first-year principals, our principals who are transitioning from elementary to middle or middle to high, and that would be their first experience. We support those principals who come to MCPS with a great amount of experience, but they're new to MCPS. So that would be another group of or cohort of individuals that we support. And also, we support those administrators and principals who are exhibiting some areas of underperformance as well. So this, the professional growth systems for our administrators, that's kind of the crux of it. It's a lot more than that, but that's a big piece of it. Our consulting principals really dedicate the majority of their time to coaching. So they go into those schools. You talked about those 37, 38 new principals in the schools at every level. They're assigned to those schools and those principals. That's their charge. They go in, they provide that coaching support. They serve as a mentor when that's needed. They also provide very specific feedback in the form of informal and formal written reports. And I'll talk a little bit about the collaboration later, but that's pretty much the work that they do. Often when we sit at meetings and I'm like, okay, we go through each and every principal every 2 weeks in our items meetings, and we just kind of talk, what can I do to support, or, here I am with the co-chair of the PAR team, which would be Mr. Fortgood, who's the vice president of MCAP. So we work very closely with them, and we provide the supports for them so that they can provide the supports for the principals that they serve and that we all serve. Next slide, please. So we, like what was mentioned, and you heard it from Mr. McCoy, the number of new principal hires, and this is just a breakdown of who we have and who we're supporting this year. We currently have 3 consulting principals. One would be Mr. David Chia. He serves as consulting principal, and he's also lead consulting principal. Ms. Kimberly Bolden. also serves, and Ms. Ann Dardarian. The third consulting principal that was brought on is, and I thank you for that, because last year we had two, and for many years we had two, but the third consulting principal is really dedicated to looking at the supports for those principals who are, we have not yet truly defined high impact, but in schools that have a higher area of, 45% or above of the farms rate. So we really dedicate that third position, that third consulting principal position, to support the principals in those schools. So out of that, we do have 5 acting principals who also receive support. 3 are at the elementary level, 1 is at the middle school level, and 1 at the secondary special school level. Next slide, please. A big part of what we do, outside of just the role and responsibility for the consulting principals through the peer assistance and review process, a big portion of what we do is to really ensure that we are not just going in and providing kind of this individual support and just a touch base here and a touch base there. We actually bring them together. We have what we call, and we like to call it leveling up our leadership, but what we do is we have new principal networks. And with this new principal network, it's a professional learning opportunity that we give to our first year principals and our second year principals, and that was new within the past few years. We've always had a new principal network, right? We worked together on that a few years back, but having it for year 2 principals was a little new. What we really want to do with that is to continue to engage them in problems of practice that they are experiencing in their schools. And what a golden opportunity to say, oh, I'm having this issue right now, and to hear others that may be in the same boat. So it's a nice way to really form and that affinity and that closeness, that relationship with one another. We know that with cohort learning, it really does make a difference. And when people feel a level of trust to kind of open up and share what they need and what things worked and what things didn't work, and can you help me with X? It really just forges nice relationships over time. And I think those relationships are what are needed in order to, we talk about this retention, right? When I feel connected to a system or to the people within the system, I stay. So what we're doing with that new principal network is affording them that opportunity. We also look at, so you can see some of the topics there, but really it's looking at leadership through the lens of your technical approach to it and what's your adaptive approach to it. Sure, I could go through my school finance, I can look at my budget and I can say, okay, let's do what we did before because that's what we did before. Or I can look at that and say, we're about to go into some new programming. What might this look if we shift resources to ensure the success of that program? So it really is looking at and working with our new principals, who are quite dynamic, might I add. And we also learn from them an awful lot. But looking at them and working with them and saying, what's your why behind this decision? So you're making this decision, it feels kind of technical. Why are you doing that? What's your purpose behind it? So having them really grapple with their purpose and their why and their next steps. So this is just an opportunity for them to do that. Like I mentioned, the problem of practice component. We talk a lot about this work, but we also align it very closely to the strategic priorities, and we look at, well, how do you continue to increase the capacity, not only for yourself in this journey, but you also, as a principal and school leader, you have a responsibility to increase the capacity of those that are on your leadership team, of the teachers. So how do you support your families differently? So we really do engage them through that process. We also we use the change management protocol or process, not quite a protocol, but a model. Because if you're looking for sustainability, how are you doing that? You know, what are the specific steps you're taking to move your school through a space so that you can get to the point where something that you've put in place is absolutely sustainable? So those are some of the things that we do, and we're just super excited. The NPN2, which are for the second year principals, so they get all this kind of cushioned support from us from year one, from the consulting principals. But a few years back, we worked very closely with the ANS implementation team, where decisions are made there regarding the ANS professional growth systems. And one of the discussions was, you know, we really do like this kind of wraparound for our first year principals, and then they become second year principals. They're like, you got it. And we just felt very uncomfortable with that, and it just wasn't enough for us. So we discussed it, and we came forward with, we wanted our consulting principals to not only serve first-year principals, but also second-year principals, not to the same intensity. So they're not going in and they're not doing observations and the like, and submitting formal reports to us or anything like that. But they do touch base with them. They do visit their schools. They do take their calls. You know, they work with them through a process. And those second-year principals also have their own PLC with us as well. So that's 5 times a year we're able to see them, work with them. You know, I'm a huge proponent of voice, not just student voice, but voices of everyone, and especially when it comes to your own learning. So a big piece of what we do is we put it out really early. These are some ticket items that we're thinking about, and we think these are important. What do you think is important? So we gather their voice and their feedback, and we create our professional learning based on what they feel they needed at that given time. So it's exciting for me. But next slide, please. I think that's my last slide. Okay. Oh, that went so fast. Okay. So here it's just a slide that just depicts some of the work that we do with the peer assistance and review process. And what I'm trying to show there is just the real collaboration that takes place. It's not just the consulting principal team. It's not just us as co-chairs, but we work very, very closely with Dr. Jones's department, all of the supervising principals and associates. We meet 5 times a year as a team, and we, just based on who that associate or who that director is serving, we nicely share what's happening and what's working well for that principal. What are some areas that we continue to work on? How might we collaborate in certain spaces, or suggestions from their peers? We have peers on that team as well, other experienced principals who also provide, try this. Did you ask them about X, or did you try Y? So it's just a great opportunity for us to engage in dialogue around those new principals and continue to grow and develop their trajectory, their course of learning. This is all done, and I wanted to be very clear that this is done within confidence because we know that people are growing and developing, and this is not a space where we take it and we go outside of that. We are truly dedicated to their growth and development, and we treat it with high levels of fidelity. And we also collaborate very closely with the leadership development unit. Earlier, Mr. Barty, and you heard him say, after they go through the AP1, AP2, and intern, then we kind of pass them over to me and our department. But it's important that you keep the line of communication open with, our colleagues here. So we work very closely, the consulting principals and the leadership development directors. We work very closely to ensure all of the learning that they have encountered over those 3 years with our awesome directors here. How are we going to continue that that progression. Where did they leave off and where do we need to pick up, so to speak? So these are just opportunities. And what I'm describing is really the power of collaboration, coordination, and communication. And I know our system has really been behind that. Not only do we do that as a team, we try to model that in our work on a daily basis with our new principals, with our, rising principals. It's just very important that we continue that collaboration in order to better meet the needs of the people we serve. So I think that's it for me, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Silvestri. Questions?
We can continue if you prefer, or we can stop for discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Just first, kind of a clarifying question. Looking back at slides 15 and 16, which reflected the number of principal hires and their experience and where they were going to farms, schools with more or less than 45% farms. There were 37 reflected there, but in slide 19, it's reflecting 38 new. Did we pick up somebody?
We probably have to calibrate our numbers, but we support 38 new people.
And so, in describing the work of the consulting principals, and I thought we had 3, and we added an extra. I didn't realize that's not very many, but that's not very many. I thought we had 3 initially, and then we added a 4th last year. But they were saying no, we had 2, and we added 1. So, wow. But just because you listed the other categories of school leaders that are consulting principal support.
Yeah.
And so the number here on slide 19, that's new, what you all would call a new principal. So when you look also at the other categories, the new to MCPS, the new to the level, so went from elementary to middle or middle to high, or underperforming, how many other principals are the 3 consulting principals supporting, aside from these 38?
So right now, it's just the 38. In the past, we've supported principals and other administrators who would fit under that, parameter. But as of right now, those 38 that I'm mentioning are first year in their assignment, either as a first year principal, change of level person, or out of county coming into county person.
Okay, and so struggling principals are being supported by others, not the consulting principals this year.
So when we identify principals who are underperforming, that means that they did not meet standard. We did not have that. So as a result, our department, we don't have principals who fall into that category. Now I'm sure, and you'll hear from Ms. Jones, what pieces that are in place to support principals that may need additional guidance, and you'll hear from Dr. Jones about that.
Okay, and then I think you said that you have dedicated one of the 3
Yes.
to supporting the principals at the highly impacted schools. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course, I guess. And the other 2 consulting principals, they too will have principals who are in schools, and once again, highly impacted, 45%, if that's the threshold we're using today. They too have principals that may fall into that category. So it's really looking at what the consulting principal brings, their background experiences. So if we have a new high school principal, for example, I would want to pair them with someone who had high school experience. So that might be a little different. So in general, all of the consulting principals can work with every last one of the principals that we serve. But we know that position was dedicated for that, so we really made a concerted effort to ensure that consulting principal supports. The other thing we did with that, which I'm super excited about and didn't add, we have current sitting principals, one who is a longstanding principal from a Title I school, principal, who is now a part of our planning committee for the new principal network. And we did that on purpose because it's very important to us to differentiate the learning for our principals. So when we're in that space for 3 hours together and we're going through what are some items that they all need to hear, and then we do breakout sessions. The breakout is dedicated for principals who may be in those 45 and up schools, so that they can hear of what are some of those resources that this principal who has had this long-standing experience at a Title I school is very different, regarding the school improvement planning process, the expectations for the state, those types of things. It's always good to hear from someone who has that experience. So we didn't want to just invite someone to be a part of it, like, oh, we're inviting you in as a guest. We wanted to have them be a part of the planning, and because I think that's where we really, get the best results in the outcome of the professional learning.
Okay, yeah, I think you just sort of answered my last question, which was asking, I know when I taught in MCPS, because I was a CTE teacher, I didn't have a cohort at my school. I had a county-wide PLC, and really appreciated that opportunity. And I was going to ask if you kind of had like a sub-PLC in this NPN
Yes.
that was just the leaders at the more highly impacted schools. And it sounds like you just said, yes, you do. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Had a question about how we're measuring success in terms of the novice principal leadership development work. So putting a lot of talented people through the pipeline. How are you measuring success? Will there be some student achievement data that is associated with your efforts?
So we use the ANS Administrative and Supervisory Professional Growth Standards, and we have a mid-year and an end-of-year. We're looking at the impact they have, the measurable impact they have in terms of moving student achievement. The director that sits on the team, as well as the principal, are part of that evaluation. There are some years where the assistant principal in the program is not necessarily successful in terms of demonstrating that level of success, and so we've had just from year to year, we've actually had some who exited the program, and so the data that we shared before exited meant that they did not complete the AP1 program and return to a teacher level position. So there are some examples, even with the additional support with a dedicated improvement plan around particular areas, they're not able to demonstrate the level of success we need. So they are evaluated, and mid-year and end of year, and a couple of them have evaluated out. Some of them even elected to step down based on their trajectory, and they've resigned from so-called that and re-elected to go back to a teacher level position. We communicate with HR so that they know that there would be a teacher transfer taking place from an administrative position to a teacher level position as a result of that. But most of them are successful, but we've had a couple of years with 1, 2, maybe even 3 at times that have not successfully completed based on the ANS standards.
Sharon?
And I was just going to add that when we transition to our final component around how school support and well-being and the directors of school support and well-being and the principal supervisors there, Dr. Redmond Jones will share a little bit more about how they really work alongside those principals to take a look at their student achievement data as part of the support and supervisionary process. So she's going to get to that part next.
That might be interesting for you to track also, you know, the graduates 5 years from now, how have they impacted student achievement at their schools? I was remembering conversations that I had with Helen Nixon, and I did ask her this question about the expectation of staying in impacted schools for these folks that are going through our leadership program. And she said 5 years is the expectation. So I just wanted to say that out loud, and if that's not the case, then let's please correct me if I'm wrong. And finally, another thing I talked to Dr. Nixon about was career ladders for principals. So generally, it's not your work, of course. You mentioned teachers become principals, and principals go to central office or other positions within the school system. And we had talked about how do we make the principal position, if you're a talented, effective principal, don't we want to keep you in schools in front of children? And how do we build that career ladder so that if you want to, you don't have to go to central office to get promoted or to have a new challenge, a new opportunity, but rather you can do that within the principal position in MCPS. I've had the privilege of having Dr. Redmond Jones, Dr. Chia, and Dr. Sergo as principals of my oldest daughter, excellent principals that are no longer in schools. And good for them. People can apply to whatever job they want to with MCPS, but let's also build that career ladder so that the principal position is just as desirable as any other position in higher MCPS leadership. Thank you. So can we move on?
Yes, so now we're going to enter into our final segment of the presentation today, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Redmond Jones, Director of Office of School Support and Wellbeing, to discuss how OSSWB, I'm still getting used to the acronym, provides both support and supervision of principals throughout the district.
So thank you and good evening to each of you. So we are a part of an office that is being reimagined, and it is reflected in the new name. The principal supervisors are part of the Office of School Support and Wellbeing. And that is intentional, and it really reflects the reality that we will not see the gains in student achievement if our students and our staff are not well. And so we are really focused, yes, on student achievement, but also on how we have to collaborate with various people in the system to ensure that that well-being is in place. And how are we working on supporting our principals to create the conditions for that well-being. So the vision for our office really is about curated, aligned, and differentiated support to schools to facilitate that expert teaching, leading, and learning. And so that really is the vision for our office. And we really are very, very focused on that. How are we supporting principals in creating those conditions? So in terms of what is an effective principal, you'll find that how MCPS defines it and the standards for educational leaders is well aligned with research. We look at the Wallace Foundation research, and they have identified effective principles as possessing an equity lens, orienting practices that really focus on their instructional discussions with teachers, building a productive school climate, facilitating collaboration and professional learning communities, and being strategic in the use of their human, fiscal, and other resources. And so our standards that we use do align with those. In terms of how we're refining the structures in our office, we are looking at, as you've heard mentioned, this year, associate superintendents are also directly supervising schools. And when we look at that, we really did a lot of work with Dr. Meredith Honig in terms of what is it that we can do in terms of principal supervision that will ensure that we are focused on that instructional piece, instructional improvement, supporting our principals in being instructional leaders. And honestly, coming off of the pandemic, where there was a heavy reliance, because our standard operating procedures were just, the rug was swept right out from under us, there was a heavy, heavy reliance on the principal supervisor in just trying to figure out what needs to happen operationally. As we, as a system, turn towards that refocus on equitable teaching and learning, it's important that principal supervisors are also, how do we now make sure that we are getting back to that focus on the instructional leadership, supporting our principals with that, and that means a focus on the learning. So we have Dr. Honig, one of the things that she talked about is if we were going to have those opportunities, we really do have to reduce the caseload or the numbers of principals who are being supervised. Because if you have a large number, it's going to be hard to maybe engage in that work. And so with the associates are taking on that direct supervision, it does result in some reduction of the numbers, but also, and this is something else that came out of Dr. Honig's work, it also gets executive leadership closer to that work with schools and provides, that real time, that close information, that real deep understanding of what it is schools are experiencing, so that as decisions are being made by executive leaders, that is constantly at the forefront of people's minds, and we might rotate the principals who are supervised directly by our associates to provide them those opportunities for that. So those are some pieces in terms of that. So with that realignment, we also, like I said, we really want to focus on that instructional leadership. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about how we support our new and acting principals. And so we actually, the associates and directors, are facilitators in the hiring process. So once there's a principal vacancy, we start to work very, very closely with the key stakeholders in, number one, making sure that that process, the hiring process, is clear and transparent, but also, and here's the key piece, being able to gather and collect that stakeholder feedback. And that's essential in that transition of supporting the seamless leadership, transition, because we have that information for those new and acting principals about what it is that the community, that the stakeholders, that the teachers, and with our secondary schools, we even, survey our students. What are the things that are most important to them? And as our new and acting principals begin, they write a 90-day entry plan. And part of that entry plan is to think about, first, our priorities, as a district, as we think about those priorities of returning to equitable teaching and learning and rebuilding trust, and as we think about that support for the wellness of students and staff, what does it look like in the first 90 days for that new principal to come in and start building those relationships? And because we've engaged in that hiring process, we can really differentiate and tailor that to the community and to what the schools really do need. Once that entry plan is developed, we do meet with them at least on a biweekly basis. Many of us meet with our new and acting principals even more frequently than that, I would say. But at least on a biweekly basis to monitor that process, that progress towards that. And the other thing that you've heard through this is the close collaboration with all of the other, with our leadership development unit, with making sure also that we're working to exchange ideas with our consulting principals to ensure that there's coherence and support. So we wouldn't want a situation where the consulting principal is saying one thing to the new principal, we're saying another. So we really do work together to provide that level of coherence, so that the support, so that there is not confusion, and that we can work together in terms of exchanging ideas that will really help and support that new principal. All right, next slide. And so when we talk about, first I wanted to talk about some of the things that principal supervisors do generally, and then move into some of the things we do when we identify that there are higher needs. But at the beginning, for all principals, associates, and directors, we'll be conducting goal-setting meetings. We usually start those in the summer. Sometimes it flows into the beginning of the school year. But here again, it's focused on the learning for the principals. So we're thinking about, and it's matched along the lines of the standards for the professional growth system. This year, we had each principal choose at least 2 standards, and we work with them actually on sort of thinking about where will we focus our efforts along the lines of these standards in terms of the learning. And Dr. Honig's work that I referenced before talks about how important it is, here again, for principal supervisors to engage in that learning, but to ensure that principals also are able to engage in professional development and professional learning. It really is a huge focus for us as we continue to refine our efforts in principal supervision. And so with those goals, we go throughout the year to monitor that work. We will attend meetings, real-time meetings that the principals are leading in terms of their instructional leadership meetings or their core team or administrative team meetings, their staff meetings or meetings that they have with families. To provide that feedback, and here again, the feedback is framed within the standards and in thinking about what goals they set for their learning. And we think about what resources the principals might need to be able to engage in this learning. So the goal setting process is an important one that we engage in. And as I mentioned, we conduct supervisory visits to see how the goals are playing out in their leadership and being able to give that real-time feedback. We also support learning through the work that we do as a cluster. So it's not just what's happening at the individual school. Most of us support principals within a cluster. And so we are able to help principals with that broader picture. We meet with the MCC, PTA, cluster reps, the principal supervisors do on a regular basis to get that feedback and to help identify things that are important for cluster-wide, trends and patterns that we're seeing cluster-wide. And then the cluster principals meet at least quarterly throughout the year, inviting the MCC PTA reps to at least one of those meetings throughout the year to be able to engage in that cluster work, thinking about that cluster focus so that it's not just individual efforts in different pockets of efforts, but here again, the coordination of that work as students move through elementary, middle, and high, so that there can be, here again, that coordination, and we can see that coherence in the work. And then we're providing ongoing feedback about school improvement efforts. And so all schools develop a school improvement plan. And here again, based on our data, we're really looking at a variety of data points. So it's not just evidence of learning data and looking at a variety of, equity accountability model data. We are looking at those data. We also look at classroom-based data, and we look at the data from student voice and stakeholder voice to ensure that we're getting a clear picture. And through that school improvement plan, that's how those data points are monitored, because we're looking at the goals that schools have set, the learning that they're engaging in, the action steps that they are taking. How is that principal communicating that constantly and consistently, communicating that through the vision and monitoring the progress towards those school improvement goals. So those are some of the things generally that we do just in our support for all principals. And next slide, please. So when we think about the strategic kinds of supports that we want to do for when there are higher needs, one of the things we're in the process of doing is we're in the process of really defining, as you've heard just throughout the presentation, okay, well, what does it mean to be identified, as high needs? And one of the things that we're looking for in terms of the leadership, you can see there that we look at leadership, we look at, in terms of the principal's leadership ability, the instruction, data monitoring and accountability, what that looks like, culture and climate, and that includes that engagement with stakeholders, and then school structures and processes. So even though we continue to develop and flesh these pieces out, these are generally the categories that we look at when we're engaging in conversations about that level of principal effectiveness. And if you look at these pieces and think back to the definition of some of the research-based categories for what defines effectiveness, they are very much in alignment. And so through the principal goal setting process, there might be not only identified supports for the principal learning, but we might think more broadly about, well, what does the learning look like for the school? How is the principal facilitating the learning? How is the principal being able to monitor what that learning looks like for the school? We also try to connect our principals in working with our Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs with what kinds of interventions can assist the school. We have a large and wide array of interventions. Do the principals understand and know about all of the interventions that are available? We work with all kinds of partners. How do we then work with them to identify and make a good match that the schools are working with partnerships that will help them in some of their school improvement goals? And we can work with our partners in OSIP to be able to help identify this. And then just being able to really assess the current state. Here again, going in, it could be classroom observations on a larger scale to really assess the current state, along with looking at those pieces of data that I discussed, and then reviewing the data to understand the impact of that work. Next slide, please. And then there was a question about the effectiveness and how we are sort of measuring that effectiveness. And you've heard it stated a little bit before, but there are 10 standards that all of our leaders are evaluated. And so in terms of that supervision, and the 10 standards, really those standards are used with our assistant principals and as well as our principals, and so that there is that alignment there. So as the directors and associates are sitting on the development teams, there really is that that alignment from the very beginning when someone starts being an administrator, thinking about having them reflect along the lines of those 10 standards. They're thinking right when they begin about how they are communicating, developing, supporting that vision for the school. They're thinking about their instructional leadership and how what they're looking for and how the instruction is grounded within those equitable practices. They're thinking about all of the same standards in terms of school improvement and culture and climate and operational effectiveness. They're thinking about all those same standards. And these are the standards that we use from our professional growth system to really provide that feedback to our principals. From principals, if what those performance criteria are inconsistently noted or seen, then we talk about and actually work on a professional growth plan for principals that actually lays out, here are standards we really want to focus in and hone in on. We support the principal in that growth. To effective, when they are consistently demonstrating the performance standards, and highly effective, that highly effective really looks at the impact, here again, the impact of their work. So it's looking at the data, is that impact evidence in the data, and is the impact actually even beyond the school? So a lot of the criterion in that category of highly effective talks not just about what the principal is doing at their own school, but how they are actually helping, whether it's systems or other schools, be able to learn as well through their leading of professional learning. So that just gives you a sense of some of the things that we do. And, here again, I want to be very upfront. These are the things that we are working on in terms of that instructional piece, in terms of the learning. There's still a lot that principal supervisors are doing to support principals with those operational pieces. There's still a lot that goes on a day-to-day basis. That is important work, but we want to be able to, here again, continue to shift our focus and find ways to shift our focus to being able to really hone in on the instructional pieces.
Thank you. I'm gonna open it up to see if my colleagues have any questions. If not, I can begin, but. This last part is, again, feels like another larger topic that deserves a lot more time. But what happens if a school continues to underperform? I've asked this question before, and the answer I got was, we give them more support next year. And that just doesn't feel strategic enough, evidence-based enough, systemic enough. I just wanted to see this. I asked this question when I first joined the board, and I wondered if there's a different answer today.
Well, it's important that we, and part of what we're doing in terms of refining some of the work is looking at really, really consistent processes to identify, when we're looking at the data, to be able to identify, what are some of the root causes of underperformance, what's really happening. And here again, these can be complex. It's not necessarily, a silver bullet, a single root cause, but there can be multiple factors, very complex in terms of understanding, and in terms of understanding why a school might continue to underperform. But that is we consider that to be our charge as we engage in really refining our work, because here again, we want to change the conditions that our students and staff are experiencing. We want to change those conditions to ensure that there can be that academic achievement. And so it really just gets down to continuing to look at the root cause and being able to address those causes, what they are. And it can, because those causes can become a variety of places, it could be a leadership piece. It could be something instructional pieces. We want to look at the variety of things. We want to ensure that there are the right kinds of resources. So all of those things, and it really just gets down to understanding that root cause and being able to address those causes as we identify them.
I'd be curious to see what other districts do. I did hear of one that, they really concentrate the support on schools that are struggling, and for example, I can't remember what the supports were, but another thing I think I read in the Wallace Foundation was having an operational leader in the school and an instructional leader in the school, because it is overwhelming to have to manage operations and instruction together. And so it's hard to really understand what you're telling us today, because it is complex. I get it. Like, there's no silver bullet. There's not you push this button and it fixes everything. But just would like to see a more systemic approach to schools that are underperforming, and understand that better. And if you could, you just restate the in layman's terms, the central office transformation work is that tied to the work of the Dr. Meredith Honig? How would you describe that for the public? What is that? What's happening?
Well, I would say that that we here again are really looking at ensuring that we are elevating and understand that reality, that student and staff well-being is a really essential piece to being able to have an impact on student achievement. It's an essential piece. And so that change in our name really signals that level of commitment and awareness school support and well-being, that we are really working to collaborate with one another to provide those resources to schools and those supports that here again change those conditions to ensure that they can that students can achieve academically. So that's one of the pieces. As the reference that that I made to Dr. Honig was really specific. Her work is very specific in principal supervision, and so that is the work that talks about how important it is in terms of the learning that and the focus on that instructional leadership. And so making sure that principal supervisors have caseloads that are manageable caseloads, making sure that there is that a closer proximity to what's happening at the school with the executive leaders. And so here again, the fact that associates are now directly supervising schools, that brings that work closer to our executive leaders. So really, it's that focus on the instruction, the instructional leadership, focused on the learning for principal supervisors and for principals, and making sure that principal supervisors can be in that position, are in that position of coaching and really helping with the principal learning, and that is more the focus and less on the operational pieces.
Okay.
Just to add to that, Ms. Silvestri, around Dr. Honig's central office transformation work in general, when you're thinking about how central offices, she's the lead researcher in the nation really on how do you organize central offices to better support schools from an equity lens. So principal supervision is one component of her research, but the idea behind it is how do you structure central offices from the lens of principal supervision, school improvement planning processes, operations, professional development, and staffing teacher teams effectively in order to make sure that you're promoting equity across spaces and supporting schools. So so although principal supervision component was discussed a little bit today of Dr. Honig's research, all of those pieces kind of work together in order to create change in supporting schools and teaching and learning. And we're currently working with her in a variety of different aspects.
Thank you. My final question was about Oakland. Oakland Terrace was an example that was brought up at the last board meeting in terms of their excellent gains in mathematics, for example. And this is a pattern that we see at the board table where an exemplary model is brought forward. And our question as board members is always, but is that happening system? Is this a one school success, or are other schools also experiencing this? And what is, I guess first of all, are we researching it to see if it's something that is proven that's going to work in other schools? And how do other schools learn from it? When does it become a strongly suggested practice that should be adopted by other schools? And again, just going away from one outlier to building system-wide standards of what's been seen to work in our school system, and then I guess what's the role of the supervisor in all that?
Right, and when going back and looking at that vision of ensuring that that what we're doing is curated, aligned, differentiated. So that very example that you're giving, we want to ensure that through the work of the principal supervisors that we, and through some of those structures that I talked about in terms of our work with clusters, and here again, our learning together also as principal supervisors, that we're sharing this information. So we, as principal supervisors, are engaging in learning, and there is a plan, for our learning throughout the year and sharing what is happening so that we can understand and help facilitate. And we've done that work and are doing that work, but we are continuously working to to improve in that area to make sure that we are able to do what you said in terms of replicating those practices that are, that are helpful. And here again, that differentiation, it could be that replicating aspects of those practices are very helpful. We also, here again, have to look at the root causes, because sometimes things could be different from, from school to school, but aligning that work, making sure that we're learning together, so part of the way that we are reorganizing our work, part of the way we're restructuring will definitely facilitate that ongoing learning.
Dr. Addison, did you have anything to add?
It is a little preview of what we're bringing to you as it relates to our evidence and learning presentation in terms of, because what you raised as it relates to research. So we do study intentionally. So Lavinia is a really good example of how we look at the impact. It started in one school, it expanded, and we continue to look at the impact of Lavinia being brought in as support for those schools to determine, do we expand? Structured literacy, perfect example. We piloted last school year based on what we're seeing. It is now being rolled out as a district-wide initiative. One, it's in the national literature around, it's the way to go in terms of teaching reading, but we're also seeing internally our own promising results as it relates to the implementation of structured literacy. And so I think as we continue to look at all of our initiatives and the supports that we bring forward, we continue to also build in a plan to intentionally examine from a research and perspective around the impact on student learning, because we know that yes, it is important to see what the research says, but we also want to make sure that there are positive academic impacts for some of the things that we're bringing in. Additionally, as we think about the ESSER funding, right, all of those initiatives that are funded by ESSER, we're intentionally examining those as well to ensure that we are best able to say this did or did not have an impact on student academics, which is the business that we're in, so that we can ensure that we definitely are moving forward in a way that supports student teaching and learning.
Thank you.
I did want to add something that, just even the example you provided, we had Mrs. Pulliam, who had a decade at Oakland Terrace, who then also had Mrs. Royal, who was not only a teacher, staff development teacher and AP at the school, but now the principal. There's more there than what meets the eye when you look at a novice person. You're talking about a decade of leadership experience, that development that took place together, being a principal developer and recognized principals. So the success they're having has a lot to do with those intentional practices of how we assign principal developers, how we leverage those who've had successful schools. Just in our past year, the principal of the new school, what am I blanking
Harriet
on?
Tubman?
Harriet Tubman. The principal of Harriet Tubman, her principal was a recognized principal when she served under her as a principal intern. And then the visiting principal was also somebody who received that same award in terms of principal recognition when she came in. So who we're aligning them with, who's assigned to support them through that process, really takes advantage of those experienced and seasoned individuals. So we're talking about, and I'm blanking out on names, but who's the, why am I blanking out on the prince, well, Jeff Klein, who was recognized as a principal of the year, was the visiting principal, and Loretta Woods was her principal developer. So there's a distinct assignment that takes place and how we build people's capacity. So we have two recognized MCPS principals who are developing our future, who ends up being the person who takes over a new school. So I wanted you to have that lens as well, and that's the Oakland Terrace experience as well.
Who was novice in the Oakland Terrace example?
That is, why am I blanking out on, I'm terrible, I'm just, Kavina Griffith, Dr. Kavina Griffith.
She was a novice?
Dr. Kavina Griffith just completed the internship program and competed against experienced and novice principals and was deemed the most viable candidate to run that school and doing a wonderful job. But her experiences and what she's been exposed to have really developed her in her capacity to lead that school, even though on paper it looks like first year.
Okay, well, they did mention that in the presentation, but raises more questions, but Ms. Harris.
Thank you, yeah. And I just want to pick up on something that Ms. Silvestri said and maybe say it much more bluntly. You know, our goal is to have a highly effective leader in every school, because that is mission critical to being the best school it can be. But, you know, we have to be honest, and not every one of our 210 schools has a highly effective leader right now. And that's just the truth of it, and that's just, there's no school system in the country that has a highly effective leader in every school for that school. And we have to acknowledge that every one of our schools is different from every other one of our schools, but every school is also different from itself every year, because that's the nature of the work. The customers are just passing through. And then we also have lots of teacher and administrator, you know, shifting and turnover every year. So you might have a leader who's highly effective for a school now, that 5 years from now, that community has evolved, the needs of that school have changed, and that leader skill set is no longer the best fit. And so we have to, I think, as a system, just confront that honest fact and not dance around it, but just to acknowledge it. And as a system, and I heard someone once say, we need to get away from a model where we develop a principal until they retire. You know, when a principal's no longer serving the needs of their school, then it's time to, you know, get a different, you know, find that a school that their leadership profile is appropriate to, and get the kind of leader that school needs at that time. And that's, I mean, but that's just the nature of the work, and not something to be afraid of acknowledging. And I would say, you know, Carla or Ms. Silvestri mentioned too, you know, her very experience with excellent principals, and I had was so fortunate that our entire elementary school experience was at a school led by Ann Dardarian, who was an amazing principal. And she, I think, embodied two leadership characteristics that I think are essential for success in a school. Not all, I mean, these aren't all of the leadership characteristics that are essential, but she truly inspired her staff because she made sure they were part of the work, they understood the work, they knew that that unique and important value each of them brought to the work. And then she did the same thing with her community. She made the community feel like they were essential to that school being the best school it could be. And not all principals treat their communities or view their communities that way. And I will say very honestly, I wouldn't be sitting here right now if Anne hadn't been the first school leader I encountered in this system, because it was because of her that I felt like it was important for me to be part of that school community, and then I had value to add. And now, you know, 15 years later, here we are, for good or bad. But, you know, that is, I think, the power that an amazing school leader has. And I'm so glad that she is back working. I wish she would be back in the school, and I've told her that. But, I mean, she's now coaching principals, and that's so important. But, and so I think we need to just acknowledge that education and the schools and a system, they're just it's an incredibly fluid landscape, and it's, as we've certainly seen over the past couple of years. And just a couple of questions. So, Dr. Redmond-Jones, you were talking about the work that and I'm probably going to blow some of the acronyms here, because I still am trapped back in 2018 when we brought on for the first time the OSSI directors, and the first 9 directors and the first 3 area associate superintendents. And so I still think of them as OSSI directors, and I know we call them something else now, but we still have 9 DLAAs or OS, whatever we're calling them now, 3 associate soups. But I think now, and I'm trying to understand the workload, are you still each, all 12 of you, because I know the area associate superintendents are taking, you know, supervisory roles over schools directly. Are you assigned a cluster?
Yes, so Yes, so and it's the OSSWV is, yeah, so we do work with schools in clusters, and that was intentional. Here again, that cluster work was so important because, here again, what I was saying about how important it is to ensure that there is that coherence with the work along the cluster, elementary, middle, and high, and because the communities are experiencing, have many similar types of experiences, and it's important that we are able to support our students looking at that broader piece. The other thing is trying to maintain some consistency within the transition, and so that piece of keeping clusters together to the extent possible was important to the extent possible. And I would say that there was the aim to have about 18 principals, and all of this varies a little bit, but about 18 principals for the OSSWB directors, and about 15 or so for the associates.
So in general, the associates would have a cluster instead of multiple clusters?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
Yeah, a cluster or, yes, a cluster, maybe two. It all depends on how large or,
Right.
small each
Right.
is. Yes.
And so, in the work that you've described, so your work as a OSSWB director and the area associates and working with the cluster leaderships, the work that you do is with all the principal leaders, not just the experienced ones. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the 38 new principals scattered in the system, they're receiving what you described with the coaching and the consulting principals and their peer group. That's separate or in addition to the leadership, the work that you do with them around the planning piece and that kind of thing. So there's like two touch points there for the new principals.
Yes, yes. And I will say that generally, directors will spend a considerable amount of time, more time with the new and acting principals. And here again, that differentiation, because, it's just a different level of support you've got when they come in new and they've never been a principal before versus they come in new to the district, but they've had principal experience. It's very differentiated, the type of support, but we would definitely spend that additional time, and so they have a variety of supports. But really important that we work together closely, collaborating closely to ensure that that is coherent support.
Yeah. And I was glad to hear you mention, too, the way the OSSWB directors and the work with the cluster community, like the MCCPTA cluster coordinators. Now, when we first started, when this model first evolved and emerged at the beginning of the 2018-19 school year, the model that was developed was that the cluster coordinators would meet with their director about, we aim for quarterly, and then the 3 area associate superintendents would meet with the area vice presidents about a similar number of times. Is that still sort of the goal, that you as a director would try to meet with the cluster leadership of the clusters that you're serving about quarterly?
Yes, I mean, I'd say at least quarterly. That's probably a good average. Sometimes it could be more frequently. And the idea is really developing that relationship so that if there are, and I really feel like we've been able to do that, so that if there is something that is a question or something that goes on, people know who to who they can reach out to for support.
Yeah, very important.
And to be able to get that perspective, their perspectives heard. I think that's really, really important. So it's really that development of the relationship. And I've been fortunate enough also to work with, several of the MCC PTA leaders have remained constant over the course of time. So you really do develop a good relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it really can help to both celebrate successes and also nip issues quickly before they grow. And so Dr. Moran and Dr. Floyd Cooper and Mrs. Morris, they too would be, since they're leading a cluster, or they're supporting a cluster, they would also be having those meetings with the cluster coordinators in their area?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay. All right, thank you. I think that is all for me.
Mr. Kim, no questions? Okay, great. Well, apologize for running a little late here into your dinner time. I do a little commercial for our next meeting on December 13th. For our viewing audience, we're going to tackle academic excellence, defining success, key milestones on the trajectory to college, career, and community. What should a student know to be able to do at specific grade levels? What are the literacy milestones, and what are the math milestones? So, thank you so much for the presentations today, the discussion. I appreciate it, and we will reconvene in December. Thank you.
Yeah.